Welcome to the Let's Talk podcast, inspired by Mesquite ISD's Leadership and Empowerment Team, or LET for short.
Our guests include educators, students, and community members sharing their experiences from their perspectives.
So let's have a real conversation about embracing our differences and finding common ground with our hosts, Dr. LaDonna Gully and Ted Madden.
We are 4 touchdowns into this podcast. It's episode 28 of the Let's Talk podcast, and we are excited about our guest today, but not as excited as he is. He's been preparing for this introduction for months. So we will have our Let's Ask a Question and Lessons with LaDonna segments, but we'll start the way we always do. I'm Ted Madden. I work in the district's communications department, and I'm a 48-year-old white man.
I'm Dr. LaDonna Gully. I am the Director of Leadership and Empowerment, and I am a 51-year-old African-American woman.
My name is Wilmer Mejia, and I'm a 46-year-old Guatemalan.
All right.
Wow.
And you're a teacher over at McDonald, teaching
Yes,
Spanish.
sir. I'm a Spanish middle school teacher at McDonald Middle School. This is my 3rd year there.
Awesome. I interviewed Wilmer for the video we did on the LET committee back in January, or I guess it was in December. He said, I love the podcast, and I've been introducing myself since then. I'm a 45-year-old Guatemalan man, because I think you were 45
I
at
turned
the time.
46 now. That's right. You got a great memory, sir. You do.
All right. Well, just give us your background, because you have an interesting background. I want to get to our first question with you, but just tell us where you were and how you got here.
Okay, well, that allows me a chance to introduce why I was wearing the mask. I just wanted to do a little promotion for the handicrafts of my country. It's a country that relies on tourism, and because of the pandemic has hurt terribly. It's still hurting. So I just wanted to show it and remind people, think about Guatemala when you want to get handicrafts.
Well, and you brought back gifts for my family. You got
Absolutely.
pens for my wife and me, and you got a little, what did you bring for my daughter?
The word is called huipil. The
Okay.
word is huipil, which is an indigenous word, which is basically a blouse that has a lot of decorations in color.
Oh, beautiful.
And what's interesting about those huipiles, and we're already, hitting the ground running here, is that they were not necessarily created by the indigenous population until they were conquered by the Spaniards in the 15th, 16th century. They all had very basic attire. They had attire that identified them by class, like the rulers, the peasants, and some people that were not necessarily enslaved in the way that we understand the word, but they were prisoners and forced workers.
Mm-hmm.
But the Spaniards, to be able to identify in my country, there's 22 different ethnic groups that do not share a commonality, not even a common language. Over 50% of the population in my country comes from a non-Spanish speaking household. However, there's one group that speaks Spanish and comprises 45% of the people. So Spanish is also the national language. But those groups were then through the conquest in the 16th century, the Spaniards decided to incorporate some of their local colors and traditions into their attire. And I've been researching that a lot. So it was used to identify and classify them so that they could even more easily defeat them.
Okay, so this is my fault getting us off your background, but I want to know kind of where, you are
Yes.
from Guatemala, then when
Yes.
you moved here and how you got to McDonald's.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's impossible for me to stop talking about my country because I am a person that arrived here who 2 weeks before I arrived, I had no idea I would be here.
Wow.
For some people, moving to the U.S. when they are born in Latin America is their goal, especially from Central America and Mexico. That's almost like a life goal because from the moment that they are gaining consciousness, when they're going through elementary school, they realize that there's no opportunity for them. I did have a lot of opportunity in my country. I have, I didn't even think I would mention this, but I met 7 presidents of my country, 3 sitting, 2 who were former presidents, and 2 who later became presidents. And the last one I met just a year ago when I traveled there. So it's a country that to me has provided me a lot of advantages, a lot of privilege, and I'm going to use that word. I've had a lot of privilege in my country. I still think I have a lot of privilege here because of that I'm bringing. So to me, moving to the U.S. was the ultimate failure. I have failed in my ability to succeed in my country where all of my friends, where all of my family is, and I have nothing to do but to take the back door and migrate. I wasn't planning it. I was having breakfast one morning looking for jobs because economic factors are what drives us here. And a friend who was living in Dallas called me and said that she was calling for my brother. She had actually offered my brother a job. And I said, I wish you would have offered it to me. Well, I thought of you because you are more fluent in English, but I knew that, you had a family, you had a life, and you were doing okay. Well, I haven't been doing well for the last 6 months. I've been unemployed. We don't have unemployment insurance. And when you don't find a job there, you cannot take a part-time job and survive. Even being a waiter or a server at a restaurant, that's not really, it's barely making ends meet. Even today, not 20 years ago when I was there, but today they make about $300, $350 a month. So having to come here was incredibly hard for me. It's still hard. When my mother gets sick, I need to plan months in advance to be able to visit her. I have no relatives here other than my wife and children, and it's been 19 years. I have no lifelong friends here. There's this phrase, when you meet a new friend and you're an immigrant, it's almost like a job interview. You have to ask so many questions about their background, and sometimes you don't click. I go and land there. I have people offering to pick me up at the airport. Sometimes I don't even see my mom in 3 days because people are calling me everywhere and seeing everywhere and having the time of my life. And the other part of my background is that I never expected to be a teacher. I was such a troubled student. My parents were going through a divorce. By the time I was in 6th grade, I got offered a scholarship that took me from it was not public school because we don't have a solid public school system in Guatemala. I've never met anyone, nor any of my friends have ever gone to public school. They've all gone to private, which sounds like a big deal. No, it's just a survival mechanism. They're really bad level of education. So I was a troubled student that I always said the last thing I want to do is be a teacher, because if I have one kid act towards me the way I've acted towards some of my teachers, it's going to break my heart. And by that, I mean, I knew I could do grades. I always said grades don't reflect how much I know about the class. Grades reflect how much I care about your class. So if I got 100, that means I cared about your class teacher. Wow. If I fail, it's because I don't like you. That led to a lot of trouble later. I got into college 4 times. I tell my students, the goal should not be going to college. The goal should be graduating college. I went to college 4 times. But then I became a teacher here after 15 years of working in the U.S. in different areas. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I believe it was 11 years of working in different areas, became a teacher. I fell in love with the profession because by then, having been married, divorced, remarried, and saw the stability of family, I welcomed my first child in my marriage, and being a teacher and being a father clicked perfectly. And by then I had also made the resolution to focus on what I had here, which was my present life in the U.S. And, it's been 13 years or 14. I'm so bad with dates. My wife's going to kill me when she hears this. So I am now a teacher. I'm incredibly happy in my role as a teacher, the way it connects with my role as a father. And also because from what I was speaking earlier about the passion that I have for Latin America and immigrants and people of different cultures and different backgrounds, it gives me a role to serve them every single day.
Wow. So impressive, and just such an amazing story, because I would tell you that you are the first person that I've heard that have said that, leaving their country was actually a failure and not, you're right. Everyone that I've ever met, and I don't know, maybe you have also, Ted, have met people who say, I really wanted to come to America. I knew it was the land of the free, the home of the brave, and it would be an opportunity for me to grow and make a difference. And it is. There's no doubt about it. But to hear someone say, no, I was very happy where I was and had no intentions of ever even think that it wasn't a consideration for me. So that's really interesting.
Wilmer's fun to talk to. If you see him out and about, talk to Wilmer. He'll say things that you just don't expect.
Absolutely.
I've never heard anybody say, from who immigrated here, said I was a failure to come to America.
Yes.
And that'll lead me to something else I wanted to ask you. On we'll meet some Wednesdays and go for a walk and chat. And one of our walks, you talked about, I believe it was the church in Carrollton, right after we went to war with Iraq. And you're telling this story, and I didn't get your point. And your point was something I had never thought of, but I think it was important.
Okay, well, you're throwing my curveball. Because that's a very difficult topic to me, because it's part of the how it challenges all my expectations. There were a couple of big issues that I faced. I already spoke English. I say I spoke better English than now because I was more confident. I wasn't aware of my accent. I wasn't aware of people double checking on me. When I spoke English in my country, I was a hotshot because tourists would come and say, "Oh, you speak wonderful English. Oh my goodness, yes. Blah, blah." So I was incredibly confident. And then I assumed I knew the culture. And I'm still keeping your question in mind, but I wanted to show you this. This is the first way that I began learning English, a Boston record from 1975. The first words that I learned in English language were "more than a feeling." It's a famous song by the band. My father loved that song, and he would translate the title of the songs word by word. más que un sentimiento. And then you go to the back and see all the liner notes. I was fascinated. I didn't get more than 3 or 4 words, the conglets, the one that looked the same. But I was so immersed into American culture since I was 8, that when I came here, I thought I knew it all. You know, I knew it all. I thought I had figured African American history out because I was familiar with Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, Martin Luther King, and I thought that I was familiar with white history. I didn't even know the word Hispanic existed. But I also had assumptions about even the understanding of other matters, like matters of faith. Religious influence of the United States has been strong in my country. Missionary groups have arrived there for as long as our history will tell us, first from Spain and later from America. I thought I knew so much. So I connected with a friend. As soon as I got the job offer, I called a friend who I knew had family living here. His mom lives here. And he was playing in a band there. And he said, I have my brother there. I can hook you up with him. He's going to take you to church. I said, wonderful. I'm made. I'm landing, getting a job. I want to bring back now to the point that you said coming to America was a failure in the story that I had planned. It was different. Because if you talk to people, they'll tell you the story of how long it took them to find a job. The people that were offering me a job were picking me up at DFW. I already had a passport. I had a visa. When people ask me, how do you come? I'm like, what do you mean? There's only one way. You buy a plane ticket. And I mean, I knew the other stories, but I had never met them. So they took me to church. It was 2002, June, and wars was about to start after all the UN resolutions and everything. And they asked us, will you all please pray? You know that our country is facing a very serious situation. And I said, yeah, sure, let's pray. And we're going to pray for President Bush, and that God gives him the clarity of mind to make the best decisions. Wonderful. Yes, we need that to pray for leaders. We're going to pray for our troops. Yes, keep them out of harm's way, protect those brave soldiers that are defending this country where I am at now. And that was it. When are we going to pray for the civilians that are going to be attacked by the mightiest military force in history because they want to topple their leader, their dictator? We've heard words like collateral damage. We're talking about lives of people who are innocent, who are even wanting to be freed from that dictatorship. I was waiting for me to hear the call to pray for them. We are called to pray for our enemies. If you're a Christian, we are called to do that. And I was like, when are we going to do that? It was shocking. It was shocking. It still shocks me. It has had such a lasting impact in my life. And it came about in a conversation with you. I don't talk and revisit those conversations much. But that's part of the shock that I lived through in the first few weeks. I still live in a lot of shock for little things. But yeah, that's in response to your question. That was quite a unsettling moment of discovery.
Wow. So when we talk about, of course, you go through this whole discovery of America, just moving here. But then when you think about Guatemala and you think about just culturally what's there, are there Blacks? You know, how many Blacks, Asians, whites, and other ethnicities are in Guatemala?
Well, according to the statistics, there's 23. The 22 indigenous groups that now are for rhetorical and other purposes combined as Mayans. They have vast different heritage. They're just not one group. It's like calling all Native Americans Indians, right. Or they're so different. They have even been warring amongst them for centuries. So there's 23. There is a group of people that have dark skin. That is what we would call them down there, Blacks, because they look that. We even, unfortunately, the way that words translate from English to Spanish can be misinterpreted in either language. We would probably call them negritos, which is little Black people. It's more a term of endearment. For me to call my own spouse fat is a praise. It's a sign of endearment. It's a sign of love, of cherishing. So words can be misinterpreted. So that group we are very aware of because they live in such a remote area. They live close to the Atlantic. You can go from the Atlantic to the Pacific in Guatemala in a car driving for like 4 hours. But they're in an isolated area where the roads have not gotten to. So when we see a Black person in the city, we don't assume they're American. Maybe now. I have not lived there for 19 years, even though I visited. Things have changed, definitely. And they're called garifunas. They are descendants of slaves that were brought to the Caribbean and spread to different areas.
Yes.
Now they acquired Spanish customs and traditions, and as they settled there, and even I would not want to say develop their own language. I'm sure they brought it with them. I'm not fully aware of how they work, but we have them and can easily identify them. They're dark skinned. They speak Spanish, of course, because the only public education available to them is in Spanish. And as soon as they step out of their small villages, they're going to be facing with all the interactions in Spanish. But we do have them. We also have a large population from the Asia Pacific area because migrants from China came too. So we call them Chinitos. Now that's a generalization because we call Chinitos anybody who could be from Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and they have also countries that are having a war with each other, don't even share the same alphabet.
Right.
But we make assumptions. So we come also loaded with those assumptions about diversity. And that's another shock that we face here, how important it is to respect and understand people. We want to be understood. I particularly want people to know I'm Guatemalan, but I have to examine myself. That's also an obligation I have towards others. Whereas from where I come from, I came from the majority culture.
Right.
When I came here, I thought, what do you mean fill out in a form what my ethnicity is? I've never been asked that before. I was white. Not only was white, but I was privileged. I mean, I got the best education in the country. I was fully bilingual. I had great jobs while I was there. And you don't realize of that privilege because you're used to it. It's a country that doesn't examine itself. You know, you talk about Indians as those people that live in the mountains in the highlands. The same way people would think about Guatemalan here, people that have not gone there, we in the city have thought the same way. Oh, those people over there. And those are the people who desperately want to migrate to the U.S. because they have no opportunity. They don't have a public education system. They don't have an economic system that allows them to climb structures. And even if they do, the first assumption is, oh, they must be involved in drug trafficking or they must be stealing something. So that I can completely understand even more so now why people, as soon as they have awareness, their desire is to leave my country that was so good to me but was not good to them. And our countries, like Mexico and all Central American countries.
Okay, we got to get to this because this is the number one question I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to have this conversation on this podcast. I think it's very important. Wilmer didn't know he was Hispanic till he got here. Wilmer was always Guatemalan, is what he told me. And so in this country, you're black, I'm white, he's Hispanic or Latino. But I want you to talk about that.
We should have started there, and we could have spent the whole 30 minutes on that for part one. I have studied this in my country because of so many ethnicities, and we understood it was discrimination. It was forbidden to ask people their ethnicity. If I ask anybody, what's your ethnicity, it was considered that I would use that information arbitrarily. It was used in the 60s for that. So by the time I was growing up in the 80s and going to school, you don't ask that. You can certainly find out easily by knowing the exact town where they come from or the state where they come from, but you don't ask that. That is racist to ask what's your ethnicity. So when I first came here,
that's racist?
It is considered an attack because I'm trying to determine and label you rather than treat you as a fellow Guatemalan.
Okay.
Because what different treatment can I offer you by knowing your ethnicity? That's the assumption in Guatemala. Because in the past, in the 60s, when the question was asked by the government, it was to categorize and create and implement policies that were to their disadvantage. Oh, they're there, so we're not going to allow resources there. And then the story might bring parallels to what's happened here. So at the time I was growing up, they told us, you don't ask that. You don't ask that. Because as soon as, first it was almost obvious. People even wear different clothing. Their pants are like this. I've joked, if it were a full body shot, I would have come in Guatemalan clothes. and you know, I'm thinking about it. It would probably not be respectful because it's not the clothes of my culture or my family. It's the clothes of my fellow nationals. So when I landed at DFW, it was probably there or probably within the day. I had to fill out a form, and it's asking my ethnicity. The only time I had seen a form asking somebody's ethnicity was in a show that I was watching on TV in the 80s called Winds of War. That it's a mini-series based on a book about the German buildup leading to World War II, where they began asking people, are you Jewish? Are you not?
Interesting.
So when I was asked, what's your ethnicity? I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not know. First, my ethnicity and what's going on in the U.S. right now. That they need to ask me that because the only reference I had was that leading up to this. And yes, there was a war brewing up and I was shocked. And I had never heard the word Hispanic in English. I had heard the word Hispano, but when we study authors that are Hispanos, we're talking about Spaniards, people that are from Europe, that worked in Spanish 300 years ago, rock bands. We talk about this Hispano rock band. Oh, you know that they're from Spain as opposed to being from somewhere in Latin America. So I didn't understand. I'm like, obviously I'm not Hispanic, which I assume is a translation of Hispano, which means Spain. So it was very confusing. And then Latino, I assumed that Latinos, because I had heard that word on TV, were Latin American descendants who were born in the U.S. So I didn't know if I was Hispanic or Latino, and what do I put here?
You're looking for Guatemalan, aren't you?
Totally. I still am because it's a very important fact. There's so many labels. When people ask me, what are you, I'm Guatemalan. Second label, Central American. There's a strong cohesion between our countries. People can move among countries without a visa, without a passport, that you show any ID. They can move freely. As soon as we hit the border with Mexico, story changes. Mexico has a different history. So we see ourselves as Central Americans like brothers. All our flags have common symbols. We were one nation at one point. We actually took advantage of the war Mexico was fighting against Spain to get our own independence without a war. And then the countries separated themselves based by their own issues. And third, I see myself as Latin American, which are the words that I use to identify myself. And then maybe I can think of myself as Hispanic because I'm getting used to it, and Latino. But please don't ever call me Latinx. Don't, because that is a word that denies the reality of my language, which is a gender-based language. Latinx would probably be friendly, and I did some research here. It's a neologism that 2 to 3% of Latino people in the United States use to identify themselves. According to a Pew Research Center study from 2020, only 23% of people who identify themselves as Hispanic know the word, and of those 23%, 2/3 think it's wrong to use it. It's basically linguistic imperialism. It's telling me, I don't get why you call yourselves Latino or Latina. I'm going to use the X word. It also denies the reality that we cannot pronounce the word in Spanish. So it's a word that to me is quite loaded. It's quite loaded. I had a student call me that one day, and I was like,
oh, wow.
I had to breathe. I had to breathe because it felt like what a bad word could feel to you or to you that somebody would call you. And we have to make positive assumptions. In the interaction among different people, we have to at least assume they're coming with good intentions.
That is dignity.
That we have to assume. People, I've read this a lot in articles in English. Oh, I don't know why they ask me where you're from. I love it when people ask me where they're from. You asked only that and I can't stop talking.
Yep.
But I know you cared.
Right.
I know you asked me the question with genuine curiosity and a sincere desire to know me. But when you ask me, oh, where are you from? Just so I can label you and check you off and dismiss you and think that I know everything about you, it's different. And we also get the same question. The same question, where are you from and where are you from? Can be interpreted so differently. I think that we need to assume positive intent and share about who we are, which is, I've been speaking about my story for so long that I don't even like to ask questions. I think we are all desperate for that. People that come from other countries, we want to share our story. We also have to learn America's story. We also need to understand this is our host country. My children are American. My children know the name of the anthem. They know the name of the flag. All glory, they see it. And I say, that's your flag. This is my flag. And they know it as the flag of their father. But they don't see themselves as Guatemalan. I tell them, I wish you could, but you're not. Your first allegiance is to the country where you were born, the country where I have a job that pays me the money that allows me to bring food to our table, and that money comes through the district where I work. So we also, as immigrants, have this huge responsibility. Not just, I want to be known, I want people to be able to identify me correctly, but I need to also have that duty towards others. And that's what I love about equity. It's about trying to find the differences and being curious about them and learning and assuming positive intent when there's misunderstandings, reframing things positively.
That's right.
I know that student did mean no harm. He probably saw the wording in an article and he thought he was being up to date.
And so it's so interesting. You said there are two things that when you said them, I thought I have to remember. I started looking for a pen so I could write it down. The first one is exactly Latinx, that word, because that is a heavily used word in research. And so, and that's really where it has generated from. But you are the second person this week where we've had discussions about using Latinx. And the request was, as yours, let's talk about that, how to use that, because it does take the gender out when we understand that in culture and in language, and particularly with Spanish, being able to identify gender is huge, is everything. It's the culture, it is the language. And so to take that out would be really a misstep. And so I am so glad that you mentioned that. The other thing that you mentioned was when you talked about the word Hispanic. And so there's been this huge push lately to really maybe start using people of color, right? And in fact, really using the term BIPOC, which is in all caps, right? I know you're familiar. He's laughing because he's familiar with it. And so what that means is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then the question becomes, well, so why would you separate Black and Indigenous and then put people of color all together? Well, because of the history of our country. Black and Indigenous people have been probably the most persecuted within our country's history. And so that's why there is this question about separating those two, but then putting it all together so that you have Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so those are two words that are really Latinx is being really reviewed quite a bit. My preference is that, we have to honor the people that we have within our district, and we're going to make and use language the way the people, our people, identify with it. I think that that's really important. And then the other thing is going to be, how do we really address BIPOC? The last thing that you said, and I thought it was very interesting when you talked about having to check a box. And what does that mean, right? When we have to check a box. Anytime we have to check a box, what is it designed to do? It's designed to categorize. It's designed to separate, right? And being asked to check the box, that is a caste system. And it is something that we have to stop as Americans and stop and look. Of course, do we need to know who's here, what's happening, do our census, all that? Absolutely we do, right? But we have to remember that we're first American above everything else. And we have these wonderful and beautiful immigrants coming into our country to help continue to enrich it. And so what does that really mean? I think that, you just really brought to light a couple of, I think, things that people are considering. Yeah. And there's lots of discussion out there about that.
I need to acknowledge my privilege in this, because if a white person or a Black person speak about these items, they may be seen the wrong way by others. I can simply say Latinx is a disgusting label to me. And I feel confident saying that, and I feel happy saying that. But I know that there's so much tension that some other people might not be comfortable. I am granted a pass in criticizing issues, economic, social, political issues that pertain to Latin America.
Just like I am.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Right.
And we need to assume positive intent, because we are not perfect. We're flawed individuals. If you're a religious person, there's only one perfect human being. If you're not a religious person, well, science can prove you that we're incredibly imperfect. So we have to assume positive intent. You mentioned the census, and the term Hispanic came from the desire to categorize. We had three large groups:
Absolutely.
Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, with completely different interests. Puerto Ricans are American citizens from the time they're born, Spanish-speaking, but American citizens, and mostly in the East Coast. Mexicans, and at the time Mexican Americans, the children of Mexican immigrants, they are completely more connected to the Latin American culture that we're familiar with, especially in Texas. And they have moved towards California and Texas. And President Nixon was very familiar with their struggle. He wanted to, I hope nobody gets offended, capitalize politically with this. I've been to his library. I've studied this topic. I used to not like him by the things I heard, but I learned a lot about him, and I admire him a lot. And whatever his intentions were, he decided to allow that word to go there, to group those three groups: Cubans, Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans, so that there would be a larger group. And the intent was also to secure funding for areas where these populations were.
Right.
Then in the 80s, with a new census, with the desire to capitalize with newer populations of Central Americans in Central U.S., moving to Chicago, to Texas, Dominicans in New York. This Spanish network that was growing up at the time, and I tell you, I conducted my research recently, began a massive media campaign. We are so shocked by things we see on TV now. Imagine in the 80s when one major network, the only Spanish language major network, took the largest public advocacy campaign in history. The word was going to stick. They chose Hispano because Latino or Latin American implied that you were born there. A Mexican American was not born there. They're not. They don't see themselves Latin Americans. They're Mexican Americans. A Puerto Rican is an American citizen, so they use the language connection more than the geographic connection.
Wow.
Hispanic pertains or originally pertained to the language connection. Latino, or Latina for females, pertain to the geographical connection. I hesitated because as a teacher, I wanted to go into explaining. You can have one boy and 100 girls around, and in Spanish, you would use the male dominant
That's correct.
term. You would say Latinos, niños, estudiantes is a gender neutral word. But, and that's the nature of the language. Going back to what you were saying about research, it's research done by English-speaking people.
Yes, it is. Correct.
So that's why they choose the word. And I need to assume what they're trying to do is to embrace us. They're not trying to categorize. I am
Right.
telling you how I feel. But I need to assume positive intent. And I cannot get mad and say, oh, you're calling me this that I don't like. No, try to examine why. So when that student called me that, I didn't like it. And then I went and well, first I took a moment to breathe. And then I went and researched more and learned more. And I said, I'm sure this is a fantastic student who was trying to read the latest terminology to address me with the more up-to-date thing. That was a wonderful
Absolutely.
act of kindness. And yet somehow I could have assumed it the wrong way.
Yeah.
All right, I've got to get this bus back on the road. Full disclosure, it's a Friday,
Yes, it is.
and we could talk into Saturday if
Let's do a
let
second episode.
if I just let this thing ride. So we're going to do a Let's Ask a Question. And Wilmer has sent us so many questions via email at letstalk@mesquiteisd.org. And he's here so he can read his own question this
Yes.
week.
Oh, wow. All right. And while I'm at it, please send your questions. Don't be afraid. We need to keep questioning ourselves. We need to keep learning. I don't know the answers to many questions I pose. Sometimes that's why I ask. How can teachers, district staff, and other adult members of the community be more active participants in the change brought forth and proposed by the LED team? Listening to the podcast is an education unto itself, and many interviewees mention the specific action steps they are taking within their position or department. What can one, as a podcast listener, do to be more prepared and or to contribute to a more equitable environment in our district's schools?
I would say that one of the things we actually just posed with our Thought is Change is to just talk about dignity. And so, what understanding and knowing what dignity is, what it is, what it looks like, and also what it's not. So I am really encouraging every single one of all of our employees, our staff, and even our students to really take a look at that framework for educational equity. Because within that framework, that's a great question. Within that framework, it goes back to those key competencies that are so critical when we're talking about how we treat each other. In fact, yesterday I was listening to a review, and they were talking about what were some of the things that were happening during the civil rights movement, right? And so when we talk about people like Rosa Parks, we talk about how Rosa Parks talked about how she felt refusing to give up her seat. She said, for the first time, I felt like you are not going to take away my dignity. You're not going to do it. And so as a result, look at that, I am Rosa Parks. And so as a result, she was like, you know what, you will not take away my dignity. And that is why she chose. She said, I am going to refuse that because you don't get to tell me, a human being, that I don't deserve to sit here. When we talk about dignity just on a very basic level, when we talk about patience and we talk about having high levels of empathy and being able to listen to people and find out, why are they thinking the way they are? The other part of that is, and it's something that you mentioned, Wilmer, presuming positive intent, not always thinking someone is attempting to attack you. So I just want to encourage I think that the best way that anyone in our district, our staff, adult members of our community, I think the best thing that they could do is really grab that educational tool for equity, that framework that was developed by Dr. Cobb and Dr. Crownapple, and really look at it and really examine it and ask yourself, am I performing all of these attributes every single day with every single interaction that I have with people day in and day out? And am I getting beyond what I see? And now I'm really finding out about the who. Who are the, who am I talking to? Who am I having this conversation with? And why do they think the way they do? And not criticize it, but say, you know what, I want to learn more. But am I really doing all of these things that truly honor dignity on a day in, day out basis? So what a great question, because it allows me to talk about the framework and just how important it is.
And as we all know by now, LaDonna earned her doctorate degree at SMU in educational leadership. And so every week we like to give her a topic so she can drop some knowledge on us. What's our lessons with LaDonna this week?
So today I want to talk about assimilation versus acceptance. And I think that it's very fitting knowing that we have our guest here. So when we talk about assimilation, I wanted to really bring this, and I looked this up, and of course you come up with all types of things, right? Assimilation theory, etc. But assimilation, according to Britannica, which is very simple, it's very simple, because we've all had, if you're as old as I am, I'm sure you had a set of Britannica encyclopedias in your house, right? I have some raised hands here.
I didn't, but I always wanted to.
That's right. It's like everybody wanted
You were
to
only
sit.
so privileged, weren't you?
Exactly.
Currency exchange rates hit us pretty bad.
That's right. So assimilation is the process whereby individuals or groups of differing heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture. Listen to that. Absorbed into the dominant culture. All right. To such a degree that an assimilating group becomes socially and indistinguishable from other members in society. That is huge. Think about that. That if I am someone who's coming here, then to assimilate me means that I truly I throw away everything that I know about my culture, my heritage, my language, to be a part of this dominant culture, right? But acceptance is really different, because when I accept you, and that's one of the values within that framework, I am choosing, I'm liking, I'm supporting you, period. I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you came from. It is very, very active. It is an active practice, and I'm actively doing it. I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are. I am honoring your culture. I'm honoring your uniqueness and your differences. I am truly just encouraging you to be the very best that you can be. And that includes every single thing about you, your culture, your heritage, your background, your story. A huge difference. And I believe that when we begin to just accept people, as opposed to trying to convince people that you need to assimilate, because you hear it all the time. Well, why didn't they do this? Well, they should have just done that. They could have why didn't they just say this? Why didn't they just do, it's always questioning, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to really just accept people for who they are, and then figure out, okay, so how can I make that a part of my psyche, so that when something comes up or when something happens, I now know and I am equipped to do something different based on me knowing and understanding.
Now, it is quite a complex, lifelong process at times.
Yes, it is.
Because we have such strong differences. I had here some documents, and I know that the time is cringing upon us, but I had some documents from Hofstede's cultural scales. And for example, there's this scale called power distance. Guatemala is rated at 95, United States is rated at 40. And what this means is that in my country, the way we perceive relationships, the structures of power are so high that we respect people. And we even, as people have graduated high school, we even confer them a title, and we call them by that title. In the United States, only by doctor. To me, it feels almost disrespectful to address my principal by his first name. And even the fact that I cannot say anything other than Mr. I should call him at least principal. That's from my culture, and it's a long process. And because time is short, I have so many things that I wanted to share. But please, like Ted said, you find me around, just find out the time. But I wanted to share a couple of thoughts that I had on the same question. There are 12 million undocumented families in the United States, 12 million undocumented people. And I need to bring that word, undocumented. We are sometimes referring to them as illegal immigrants. It's impossible to address the reality of Latin American immigration, just like without discussing illegal immigration, the same way that we could not address the issues that pertain to African American populations without understanding the context of slavery and civil rights. It's a reality. As a teacher, I have a wonderful opportunity to work with the minds of my students daily. We all have an opportunity to try to work on ourselves, but it's hard. We see the news, they unsettle us. Whatever side you have, there's always going to be something that comes from the other side and takes you by surprise. And you think, wow, there are things that should not be. People should migrate here legally. Well, I've been here 19 years. I've been a teacher 10 years, and I'm still not a citizen of the United States. And I thought I would not disclose that. It's not a big issue. Of course, I'm a legal resident, but I only acquired that because I married an American woman. Even though I have 2 masters from SMU, I came here fully bilingual. It's a myth that the path to legal citizenship is easy and that anyone can do it and get in line. It's a myth. The guy that took me to church that first time, he was here at the time illegally, and I always question, how can you go to church and be legal? He had to wait 12 more years. After that, he had already been residing here 8 years for his process to be completed. He had the most wonderful job offers. He was working for a car company. He couldn't leave out of the country because if he left, he could never return. Mm-hmm. We have to empathize. Why do people choose to come? We're not going to discuss that now. We don't have the time. But I found a phrase that connects with us. And as teachers, we need to know there's 5 million children living with an undocumented parent. They might be American born. They are citizens, the children. But they live in the fear that the parent might be deported. When I was training in my first internship in the summer, there was a kid who would not stop crying during my second math lesson the day before my supervisor was going to come. And I was like, what is wrong with this kid? And I had to talk to him on the side. His parent, his father, had just been deported the night before. Mm-hmm. How can a child focus? If anybody of us loses our parents, we might understand it's a tragedy or reality. But if they're taken away and they're alive and you cannot see them, we cannot fix this. We cannot, or especially as a public school teacher, I'm not going to take a political stance, but I'm going to pose this question. Will you throw your baby off a second-story window onto the thorny bushes down in the front yard? I'm sure you would if your house were burning. If your house were burning, you would do it on a heartbeat. People sometimes say, why do they do this? Why do they send their minors unaccompanied? I show my students some clips from YouTube. There's documentaries available. Send us an email. I'll give you a great list of resources. And when I've shown those clips, even when I was in the Carlton district, I showed a movie called The Long Way. It's only about undocumented minors. And the next day after I showed the movie, I had 5 people come to me and say, parents, that's what I did. They were parents of my students. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked. I was nervous because I thought they're going to complain when I'm showing this stuff. It's a reality that we live. We are not unaware. My best friend, the only friend that I consider truly friend that I made here that we stuck and we still message each other, he was deported 11 years ago. His wife was beating him and attacking him. And when I encouraged him to call the police, you cannot touch her, step out of the house, you're concerned about your daughter, the police interviewed them, and they decided that the first step they needed to take was to remove him, and he was deported. He's made a great life. He's traveled to six countries now. After that, as an engineer, and anyway, but we have to be more understanding. We don't know what people are going through.
We don't know what people are going through.
If you want to check my Facebook, I found a picture looking at the immigration crisis that's going in Europe too, because it's all around the world. Nobody puts their baby on a boat in the middle of the ocean if they don't have any other choice. I mean, that's their only choice left. I just thought of Moses. I know there's a lot of people who embrace Christianity and the Bible. What did the mother of Moses do? So I want to just give my thoughts on the question that I posed. As a teacher, I want to give the gift of pronunciation. Especially African American students have names that are very hard for me to pronounce. I ask them the first day of class, please help me pronounce your name right. Well, I prefer to be called like this, usually an initial. Okay, I'll call you like that as I prefer, but you allow me, teach me how to pronounce your name right. I want to. We, as members of this district, of this community, let's give the gift of pronunciation. If somebody's name is Juan, oh, Juan? No, Juan. Try it. Oh, Johnny, right? I can call you Johnny, right? They'll probably say yes because they're a kid. No, let's ask them. And let's be gentle and sincere with our curious inquiry. When we ask somebody where they're from and they say Mexico, let's not just hope they say Mexico so we can brag that we've been to a resort there. Because that's sometimes the reason we ask. Oh, I've been there. I've been to Cancun. You know, it was fun, wonderful. Oh my gosh, those margaritas. Then I don't want to tell you where I'm from. Then, yeah, it's an insulting question. But if you ask me like you did, Ted, and you have, where are you from? And what does that mean? And you have taken the time. That's wonderful. That's a gift. That's a gift that you give me. The gift of pronunciation, the gift of sincere inquiry. And above all, grace. Let's not judge others. Let's assume positive intent. When something happens that doesn't work, let's reframe it positively.
Well, I think we set a record, but I think it was worth the time.
Yes, absolutely.
I hope this met your expectations for being on the podcast. I know this is something you wanted to do.
Yes,
Yay.
It was wonderful.
Thanks for coming in. That's Wilmer Mejia.
Yes.
Did I say that right? You said Mejia, didn't you?
Mejia, yes.
Sorry, that's Wilmer Mejia, middle school teacher.
Wonderful, thank you.
Over at McDonald Elementary or McDonald Middle School. Well, we need more Wilmers.
Yes,
for
we
our
do.
ongoing conversation. Send us an email like he does so often at letstalk@mesquiteisd.org. Reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram using the search term LetMISD. For Dr. LaDonna Gully, for Wilmer Mejia, I am Ted Madden. Let's talk again next week.